Rohini Pandhi, and my talk today is going to be about building products for developers. Most of my experience in product management has been with very engineering-centric companies, and so these are a little bit of lessons learned from working with a unique set of end users known as developers. And a lot of these discussions and lessons learned that I'm going to be talking about will be based in a lot of the core product knowledge that we already have. The B2C world, the B2B world, there's certain things about product management that stay the same. There's just a few caveats when you think about developers that might be of interest to you guys. So let me start off by explaining what PubNub is, where you guys are sitting right now, and why there's an engineering bend to this discussion. So PubNub is a data stream network. What that means is if you are familiar with the computer science concept of publish, subscribe, pub/sub, that's a play on our name, PubNub. It's about sending and receiving data in real time all around the world between applications and devices. So you can see with our really simple APIs, you can publish a message saying, hello world, and anybody that's in your channel or your room or however you want to think about it can subscribe to that and hear your messages. And so a lot of our customers use PubNub and PubSub for different use cases. We have folks from like Lyft and Sidecar using us for connected cars. Logitech uses us for connected homes. We have Seeking Alpha for financial streams, a lot of different use cases, but they're all based on this pub/sub message transfer. So we have about 1,000 customers now, and the interesting thing about our customers is that 99% of them came to us. We didn't go and outreach, we didn't try to sell them. They were all from inbound marketing sources. We have about 200 million devices on our network now, making the same transactions as a Twitter-like level. So the publishes you could think of as a tweet, and the subscribes are the people that you follow that receive that message. So we're operating at a pretty big infrastructure level at this point. And why does it matter that we're in the B2D or business to developer space? It's interesting because about 5 years ago, maybe, there was a lot of focus on mid-management or higher level management that was picking technologies and forcing that down developers' throats. And that's kind of had a shift recently, where now it's the developers that are in charge of their own technology stack. And so they have the buying power, they have the purchase power. And so you have to be able to explain your product, understand their ways of doing business, and sell to them directly. So just to start, the first thing you might want to do to a developer or any user that visits your site, they might have heard of you or your company, but you really want to sell a dream. You want to explain how your product enables them to be so much better. My favorite thing is on the Buffer blog, they have this awesome picture. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. Definitely recommend their entire blog about the desired outcomes. I think it's called People Don't Buy Products, They Buy Better Versions of Themselves. And so you want to explain how your product is the flower power to that user. It enables them to be able to do X, Y, and Z. It's not necessarily about your features, and that's something we're still working on at PubNub, is communicating not just our features as we think of it, but how does it help an embedded device developer do what they need to do. Some examples of products that I think do a really great job of explaining this value prop to developers are folks like Stripe, Airbrake, and Heroku. They pretty much lay out their value proposition as, hey, we do this thing that we know you don't want to be doing, so you can focus on the things you want to be doing. And it's not just about their splashy websites. It's also that they have great documentation, they have support options, and they have really clean, crisp APIs that abstract the complexity of things that developers don't want to be worried about. It's a really simple and clear way to do everything that they do. So at the point where you have like the developer, the wary visitor, I'll say, to your site, and they've kind of seen what it is that you do or that you say you do, at that point you need to be able to empathize with them. And so even if you're not a developer, know what makes them tick. And this has been bugging me since I put this in the presentation, the fact that the tags are not correct. But it's just getting into that mindset and being able to at least understand their pain points. And when they're evaluating your product, especially if you're core service, the fact that they're going to be putting you into their system, their application, means that later on, if they need to rip you out, that is going to be so much more painful for them. So they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to want to know everything that you do up front before they invest any more time into you. So help them out. These are a bunch of questions that just have come to, like, I've seen or I've heard about or I've just thought about. I'm not going to go through all of the bullets, but I think the biggest one here is documentation. What I've seen is developers usually go to the pricing page to learn about your product or your docs. And if those docs aren't solid and they don't have example code or tutorials or quick start guides, you've pretty much lost them. The other thing that I think is interesting is something that we've learned at PubNub, where the last bullet here is how transparent is a company about downtime issues, postmortems. And I think it's kind of human nature where you want to hide the things that don't work so well in your product and kind of keep them off into a corner until you fix them and then put them out into the market. This is a little different because in the developer space, in the infrastructure space, people know that there's going to be downtimes, there's going to be things that happen, and so it's to be expected, but to hide that actually ruins transparency and trust with our customers. And so it was more about telling people more than telling them less. And having that kind of like these postmortems, here's what happened, here's what we did to fix it, here's why it won't happen again, went a long way. All right, so then the next track is kind of designing your solution for the developers. And this can go from like API design, back-end stuff, all the way to the front end of visual design. So from the API and back-end perspective, it's really important to take a product perspective to even APIs. So think about, like, why is it that you're building this call? What is it that it helps the developer do? Why would they need this functionality? What specific problems or use cases will it help them solve? One of my friends actually uses the term REST-ish to say, don't follow standards for standards' sake. It's just about building human-readable APIs. So I think that's the goal, build something that's REST-ish. And then from the visual design perspective, it's, I'll tell you a story about just limiting options and choices that actually help users. We have a administrative portal at PubNub where it was built for developers, by developers, and so we kind of threw the kitchen sink at them. We said, you can have all of the flexibility you want, you can do whatever you want in this dashboard. And what happened was people got paralyzed with all of these options. And the default action is no action. And that's exactly what we saw for most of our customers. The hierarchy of our applications to keys to other stuff inside that portal was non-existent. People just didn't do anything, and that was the easiest course of action for them. So it's more about just guiding, leading, nudging people to the goals you want them to achieve. This is a quote by Richard Thaler that says, the moral is that people are paying less attention to you than you believe. So your product is maybe seconds, minutes, hours of the user's day. Don't make them be the product expert when you're supposed to be the product expert. So kind of tell them what they should do, nudge them into the right direction, and then limit options. We found that was really helpful for our users and something we're also working on right now. So once you've kind of removed some of the barriers and gotten people into your product, into your visual design, into your APIs, at that point, step out of the way. Just get out of their way, let them, especially, and developers, let them start playing around as quickly as possible. Once you've ensured that your product is easy to use and people understand what they're doing, just let them start playing around and testing you out. Some barriers that you might not think of but are interesting from what we've seen are unreliable support, bad documentation, as I mentioned, overall lack of clarity, and high prices. So we have a free tier that we offer developers and evangelists, and that means we can't hide anything. Like, all of our features, all of our products are available for free to these users at a certain limit. But that means that they can get started really quickly, but that also means we can't really hide the dirty laundry as well. So everything's available, but it also, again, brings in that transparency and trust with the consumer. one thing that, in terms of the user onboarding experience, a tool that I really like referencing again and again is useronboard.com. If you guys haven't seen this, they have a UX teardowns, I think it's called. And they go through a bunch of B2C companies and like the wizards that you start with as users and a few screenshots, and they pretty much say what works, what doesn't. And it's really interesting. And because I still view B2D, business to developers, it's the same thing as consumers because developers are people, it still applies. There's still a lot of relevant material there. And then once you're kind of at that point where the user understands your product and they're getting into more advanced areas, that's where you can start going into figuring out what the habit-forming pieces are of your product and visual design. And what I mean by that is actually something that are a couple different frameworks that I really like. The one on the left is by Nir Eyal, and the one on the right is by BJ Fogg. So I won't go through the details of this because these guys do a great job of it already. You can search both of their names. I think they're behavioral scientists, economists that teach at Stanford. But the very high level, really quick thing is in order to hook users to using your product over and over again, you need to have a trigger. Usually it's like a link or an email or something, and you get them to do something. So the action is based on the BJ Fogg model of like motivation and ability. So an example of this is like if you signed up for Pinterest and the action they want you to take is to pin your first picture on a board. And so the trigger is the email, and the action is to pin your first thing. And so the motivation is already high because you've signed up and you got that email, and the ability is ridiculously easy because it's a single button click. And so you've passed that threshold of when the triggers succeed. The next piece of it is variable rewards. So there's I think they explain it as like dopamine surges when you don't know exactly what you're going to be getting out of it. It's like being at a slot machine and keep like pulling the lever just because you don't know exactly when it's going to come, but you are expecting a reward to come out of it. And then finally, asking your users for an investment of their time, their social capital, their money. I think a good example of that is Netflix. They ask you to rate your favorite TV shows and movies, and in return, they give you a personalized recommendation, a personalized queue of other TV shows and movies you might be interested in. So you give your time, and then they create something sticky because you don't want to move over to any other video service because you've already gotten personalized recommendations from them. All right, and then of course, as PMs, we're always analyzing, always measuring, always experimenting, tweaking, building hypotheses, figuring out what the results are there. Just a few quick hits in terms of qualitative and quantitative analyses. A lot of these sites, great sites for just talking to other developers, listening to conversations that are happening. But I think the most effective tool that I've used in terms of qualitative analysis is to bribe friends. So when I first started at PubNub, I actually just asked a few developer friends, like people that knew JavaScript to iOS development to whatever else. I said, sign up for PubNub, use whatever SDK you want, just create a hello world, really simple application. And if it takes you more than 30 minutes, just stop what you're doing. And for that, you can pick the place where we go to lunch, and I just want to ask you a bunch of questions. And so the questions range from how easy was it to sign up, was the documentation good enough, how do you feel about PubNub now that you've used it, things like that. And of course, because the people that know you, the feedback is really unfiltered. And in terms of quantitative analysis, we use Optimizely for A/B testing here, and Google Analytics and Mixpanel for website tracking. One thing that I thought was really interesting was that we found from backing out some of the data that 25 to 30% of our users were using ad block, which is a huge number. But when you kind of step back to think about it, they're all developers, they're all internet savvy, they know what ad block is, and you're like, oh wow, okay, so I'm not going to know a fourth of my customer usage, but it does make sense. All right, that's all I have for you. There's a bunch of stuff that I pretty much stole from myself on my blog, so if there's any links or something that you want, feel free to go on Medium and get that. I only have 2 blog posts, and they're all about this, so it's pretty easy to find. Cool, thank you guys.